Hey there, we haven't posted a video in a while because we had a baby. And now that we're starting to get into a little bit more of a routine, I'm gonna toast the birth of my son with a very special celebratory dram. So please join me. Hope I haven't lost my alcohol tolerance. We'll find out. Hey guys, I'm Nath Martyn, the Whisky Scribe. I'm a whiskey enthusiast and I love all things whiskey. But taste is subjective and there are a lot of different whiskies out there. So whether you consider yourself a connoisseur or you're just looking to understand more about whiskey, let's explore it together. If you'd like to see more from me, consider subscribing. I'll be trying to put up videos every week depending on how my new dad duties allow. You can also follow me over on Instagram. And if you do enjoy this video, please give it a like. It really does help me out, and I'm always open to suggestions for new whiskies to review. So because this is for a special occasion, to celebrate the birth of my son, I didn't want to get something generic, like just go out and get the most expensive Scottish whiskey I could find that's really old. I wanted to be somehow relevant to the situation. So I did a lot of researching, and I had some pretty key criteria. So I was looking for an Australian whiskey, because my son is Australian. As much as I love Scotland and Scottish whiskey, I don't really have any familial connections to that country. So getting a Scotch just wouldn't really have been relevant to me. And secondly, I wanted something unique and limited because I'm not just going to be drinking this whiskey to celebrate his birth today. I'm going to save a 200ml bottle of this and in 20 years time, revisit it with my son, if he likes whiskey. And then that way, it won't just be a whiskey that's still available on the market. It'll be something so unique that you can't get it anymore. It'll almost be like a time capsule of this moment. So after going through the selection of pretty much every single malt whiskey being made in Australia, what I eventually came down to was, from the Corowa Distillery, this is the Peated single barrel number 403. So this particular whiskey was a single barrel that was considered too good to vat in with the rest of their whiskey. So it's a peated single malt, barrel number 403, and this is bottle 156 of 168. Now I've tried Corowa whiskey before and really enjoyed it, and their peat, the smoky flavour that you get from their peat in the previous ones that I've tried, they actually kind of smell like an Australian bushfire, which just really brought home that Australian connection, as well as just the fact that it's made in Australia. But what really resonated for me though was that on the website it stated that it's a young whiskey, but the perfect example of how older doesn't always mean better. And that just really resonated for me because our son was born a little bit early, technically premature by a couple of hours, but he's still perfectly healthy and well. So the idea of a whiskey that's young, but just as good as the rest out there, just seemed really fitting. Okay, so we already know this is a younger whiskey than normal, so the fact that it's got a very light straw colour is really no surprise. This is an ex-bourbon cask, so you're not expecting a lot of colour to go in there, mostly that gold. And then on the nose, there's a faint nose of smoke in there, but I'm actually getting more of the sort of honey and vanilla that you typically get from bourbon barrels. And before I dive in, I should have also mentioned, so this is bottle 156 of 168, so there's only 168 bottles. It's ex-bourbon cask. It was aged on the western side of the distillery and subjected to the fierce Australian heat, so it's big and peaty with tons of ex-bourbon vanilla character. It's a cask strength, so this is 62.8 ABV. It was barreled in 2019 and decanted in 2022. So it's about 2.5 years old. So young, but still legally whiskey by Australian definition. As that's opening up, I'm starting to get a little bit more of that peppery peat, where it's sort of like a white pepper sort of smoke. But yeah, not getting a heap on the nose. So there's nothing left to do but to go in. The amount of peat on the nose is very deceptive for what comes across on the palate, because that's honestly, that's like a smoky honey that's come across there. And funnily enough, I mentioned before that Corowa, or some of the Corowa whiskies I've had before, have got sort of like this bushfire sort of smoke to their peat. That's not coming across in this one. I'm not disappointed, because this peat is, that pepperiness, it's quite unique. It's got quite a bit of the sweetness still infused with it. There's some sort of fruity flavor that I'm getting there, and it's quite subtle because that peat is so bold. But I'm thinking it might be apricot, or some sort of other stone fruit. Stone fruit's in there as well, sort of like rock melon, but I'm not 100% certain. Jess is laughing because I've been wrong on stone fruits before. Those stone fruits, the rock melon sort of flavors, but I now know that rock melon is not a stone fruit. That peat, the longer it's in the glass, the more it sort of evolves. So at the start, it was this very white, peppery, smoky sort of peat. Now it's almost meaty. So it's changing. I can definitely see what they mean. This is a beautiful whiskey. If you told me it was more like 4 or 5 years old, I'd believe you. It's got that complexity, the fruit that's carrying across, but the peat is still the hero, which is fantastic. I've commented before about distilleries that don't know how to do peat and how they should really just steer clear of it. Corowa's not one of those. They've got some nice unpeated whiskies, but this is pretty sensational. It's pretty unique. I don't think it doesn't come across as any sort of Scottish peat that I've had before. So this ticks the box for unique. And it's lingering on the palate too. You've got this honey, that sort of the sweetness remains a little bit longer than the smoke. It's got this like a light buttery texture in the mouth too, and that sort of lingers behind. So all in all, that's a pretty nice whiskey, and it's ideal for a special occasion. And I'm really looking forward to, in 20 years' time, enjoying that with my son, if he likes whiskey. I think that's all I need on the tasting.
That was the fastest tasting you've ever done.
It's really enjoyable, and that peat is, like, I think I could keep coming back to that peat. I think each time I sip it, it's a little bit different. I have to say, I really do enjoy those whiskies where they're an evolution. You can have some great whiskies with great flavor profiles, and once you've unpacked it, it just tastes exactly the same every time you sip it. So sometimes I really enjoy those whiskies where you taste it and it gives you one impression, and then a few minutes later you taste it again and it's changed. And then each time you come back to it, it's a little bit different. It makes it more of an experience. And I would say that because of the way this thing is changing, it's not a whiskey that you should just sit back and have as a session. Like, this is a whiskey that you should actually sit down, taste, and unpack. Because if you're just sipping it while having a chat with friends, you're gonna miss some aspect or evolution of it. You see, now that peat has turned into a little bit more of almost like white smoke. So I love how that keeps on changing. So I said earlier that I wanted to save some of this whiskey to be able to have with my son in 20 years' time. So when I ordered this directly from the distillery, there was a section on the order form where I could add a comment, and I just said that I did want to come back to this later and asked if they could send me a 200ml empty bottle. Not only did they send the bottle, but they also sent a blank label. So I'm able to actually write on this specifically what this whiskey is for, when we can open it again, and I can decant the whiskey into the 200ml bottle. And that way we've got that saved later. We don't have any air in the bottle oxidizing the whiskey over time. It should taste exactly the same now as it will in 20 years' time.
It should taste the same, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. So in 20 years' time, when we reopen this, it should taste the same then as it does now. Although this was the whiskey that I went with now, there were a few other contenders. So some of the ones that I shortlisted were also Launceston Distillery's Tawny Cask Matured H1748. Now, this was a Tasmanian single malt that has won gold and silver awards at the Australian Distilled Spirit Awards, And it stood out to me because it was a vatting of 2 casks to produce one fantastic whiskey. And let's face it, it does take 2 to make a baby. But I haven't actually tried anything from Launceston Distillery before, so as much as I do want to actually try their whiskies, I didn't want my first try to be one that I'd bought for a really special occasion. One of the other whiskies I was looking at was the Belgrove Distillery Oat Whiskey Batch 6. Now, if you haven't heard of Belgrove Distillery, it's owned and operated by Peter, who is an absolute mad scientist of Australian whiskey. He does some really small, limited batches and is not afraid to experiment. Now, I was looking at the oat whiskey because when Jess was pregnant, she would find in the morning she craved porridge, and you could really tell that the baby enjoyed that. So having a whiskey made from porridge seemed really, really relevant. But again, I haven't actually tasted an oat whiskey before, so it'd be a little bit of a backfire if the whiskey that I bought to celebrate the birth of my son turned out to be a whiskey I just don't like. But if you ever get a chance, do check out Belgrove Distillery, especially if you can go and visit directly, because Peter's wild. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how I decided on this whiskey. And have you selected a special dram to celebrate a birth, anniversary, or some other special occasion? I'd love to hear what you ended up choosing, so let me know in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. I'll be back to posting videos every week. I know I've been doing a lot of Australian whiskey lately, so I will be going back to some Scottish drams next week, so stay tuned for that. But until then, enjoy what's in your glass and slange.